Good morning. A year ago, the FCC created the Supplemental Coverage from Space, or SCS framework, and since then, things have moved fast. T-Mobile and SpaceX are offering satellite texting. Starlink bought a big chunk of mid-band spectrum from Dish. AST is working with AT&T and T and Verizon, and Apple quietly made satellite texting a standard iPhone feature through Globalstar without using the SCS framework at all. We've gone from should satellites be allowed to use terrestrial spectrum to multiple competing approaches already in consumers' hands. But we skipped over some hard questions along the way. The SCS framework requires satellite operators to partner with terrestrial licensees. Is that a sensible coordination mechanism or a bottleneck that lets terrestrial carriers control access to space? Spectrum rights have traditionally stopped at the atmosphere. Do they now extend all the way up? And what happens when these satellites pass over countries where they don't have authorization to transmit? These aren't all questions with obvious answers, and our panelists don't all see them the same way. Let me introduce them in alphabetical order. Uh, Roger Entner is founder of Recon Analytics and has been arguing that Starlink has already won this race, in addition to many other things and analyses, of course. Tom Hazlett at Clemson has been making the case for spectrum property rights longer than most of us have been paying attention, and even after we stopped paying attention. Um, Jennifer Manner is SVP for Regulatory Affairs at AST Space Mobile, which is building one of the systems we're talking about. And Greg Roston at Stanford has spent years thinking about how to get spectrum allocation decisions out of administrative proceedings and into markets. And for people listening, you can submit questions or comments via the Q&A window. Please do, and we'll try to answer them in as close to real time as we can. But let's start with the most fundamental question, and with the person on the agenda who works with all the people who have to make this tech work. Jennifer, tell us what D2D is and how it works.
So first off, thanks for inviting me here, and I'm thrilled to be with some old friends, not old in age, knowing them a long time, knowing them a while, friends, today, and talking about spectrum, which is one of my favorite topics, and space and satellites. So let me start and say that there's two different flavors of D2D, and I think it's important that we separate them out when we think about them and we talk about them. The first is what you're talking, supplementary coverage from space. Spectrum that uses terrestrial spectrum. And that is something that's, to be fair, if you had told me this was going to happen back in the early, I guess before the pandemic, I probably would have laughed at you. I probably did laugh at you. But here I am working at AST Space Mobile, and I'm a big believer. And in this case, I really think technology finally caught up with the dream of the satellite industry, and I'd say of policymakers of bringing, and I'm looking for my satellite phone, my cell phone. I have no idea where I put it. Bringing communications to a cell phone, and I think that happened largely because of technology. We got the cost of satellites down, we got the cost of launches down, and finally we moved to using non-proprietary technology for satellite, and we're able to use 3GPP standards-based technology for cell phones. And that's true for both flavors. So I really say it's the technology that's changed and the economics have changed that have brought this here. And now we get to the spectrum side. So with the change in the satellites, and if you look at some satellites like our AST satellites are very capable. We're able to operate in a way that we can operate within the constraints of terrestrial mobile spectrum. So we abide by the protection criteria which they have to meet to protect adjacent channel systems and cross-border systems. And I think that's very important in this way because we're leasing spectrum from the terrestrial operator. The terrestrial operator is giving us rights to put that spectrum on our satellites, and they then have the determination, when is that going to be available to their consumers? So are they going to make it available in an area on a priority basis, or is it going to be a secondary basis? It really gives the terrestrial operator the ability to use it to serve its consumers in a way that makes sense. And that's why probably a number of us have seen already on our cell phones, even if you're not subscribed, you may get a bullet, the little note that says, you're going out of terrestrial coverage. Do you want to use satellite, right? That's an example. So essentially what's happened is the satellite operator has to have an agreement with the terrestrial operator whose spectrum it wants to put on the satellite. And then basically the satellite is the bend pipe in the sky that brings it down, the traffic down to a gateway and passes it to the MNO. And then the MNO, the mobile network operator, distributes that to its customers. So that's how what you're saying SCS is, um, generally direct to device. There's another version which is slightly different, which is when you're using mobile satellite spectrum. And there's a few bands that I'm talking about, but they're all within the S and L bands. And so folks like Global Star, SpaceX has announced plans. We've announced plans, are planning to use the spectrum. Lynx, I think, is another. Planning to use the spectrum to provide similar services direct to cell phones using mobile satellite spectrum. The difference is the spectrum is allocated to satellite service, so you do not need to lease that spectrum from the MNO, and that gives you more flexibility. Are you planning to work with the MNO? Our business plan is to use that spectrum and provide it to our different MNO partners. And there may be others who are planning to provide it directly to end user customers. So that's a business case issue. But those are the two broad flavors, Scott. I'm happy to dive into any of them.
Well, just to ask a little bit about a little bit more about it. So the way you presented it, it sounded as if the terrestrial providers are, they're in control of the spectrum that they have licensed, of course. And so how do you work with them to decide how much of that spectrum you can use, what's available? Is it a collaboration, or do they tell you this is what you can do and you have to work within that framework?
So I'll be honest, I'm not on the business side, so I can't
Sure.
really speak to that.
So,
Okay.
so basically, what happened for AST is AT&T and T and Verizon took aside the guard band of the 850 cellular spectrum and made that available to AST. What T-Mobile did was they made the G block of the PCS band available to Starlink, and that's how uh, both satellite services are currently working. Um, when the satellite provider owns the spectrum, they can then do what do and allocate how they want to do this, right?
So then that actually goes into the next question, which was going to be what can it actually do today, and what's a timeline for moving to something approaching broadband service? But before answering that, is the way that it's currently allocated, does that affect what it can do? So if you're talking about guard bands, it makes sense that it's restricted largely to texting right now, low bandwidth
I
uses.
I don't want to get into Jennifer's lane, but I think texting is only the beginning. I think we
Mhm.
will very quickly see, uh, and for example, what T-Mobile is offering with Starlink today is already apps and it's already video. So what we will see very quickly is a full rollout of broadband services. Starlink today for a terrestrial terminal is already providing broadband services. The question is always where,
Mhm.
right? Because uh, do I think we will have broadband satellite service in Manhattan? No. Will we have it where the more rural, the more sparse you get, probably the faster the fatter the pipe will get. And both um, uh, Amazon Leo and Starlink won the one beat, and so partially their satellites will also serve that, and they have 100 megabit per second requirements.
Yeah, Jennifer.
So our satellites were designed for broadband. Totally agree with Roger. So we've already tested. We just deployed our seventh satellite yeah, seven, I have to always count. We're deploying another one. We'll have 45 to 60 satellites by the end of the year that are up and operational. They will be broadband. We've already proven streaming, broadband, video calls and so forth. So I don't think we should think of it as a future capability. It's certainly a capability that's here today. And I think that's critical for users because if not, this isn't going to become,
Yeah,
a super popular service.
yeah.
Well,
The future is here. It's just unevenly rolled out yet, right? And like with the AST service that will work together with AT&T's FirstNet, this is literally a heaven sent for, say, fire jumpers who need to show their command and control, how the situation is on the ground in full live, you know, color, right?
A- And just to build on that, Scott, so I go back to, we talked about the two flavors, the terrestrial spectrum and the MSS spectrum. We've acquired rights to use 40 megahertz of L-band spectrum. You've seen SpaceX acquire my old company, Spectrum, EchoStar. I've been working on the S-band too long, but putting that aside, all of that's to bring additional capacity to meet demands, right? It's so that we have better broadband service because the spectrum you may get from the terrestrial operators not be enough for the future when you start having more and more users.
But to be clear, the broadband nature of it is just for fixed. Um,
No.
no, you can use broadband
It,
with satellite,
yeah,
broadband from satellite on
so
your mobile.
yeah, you've got the fixed broadband competitors, so Starlink's, fixed service, Amazon Leo's fixed service,
Hmm.
Viasat's, Hughes, you can choose your operator. These are mobile, these are direct to your cell phone. So you're streaming on your cell phone. We had FirstNet out visiting us at our factory. They were thrilled. This gives them the capability right from their device. They don't need a separate device. They can be mobile. They can be fighting the fire.
so can I jump in here for a sec? Probably Tom's going to say the same thing, but you guys both said, oh, there's terrestrial spectrum and there's satellite spectrum, and to me, there's spectrum, and it should be used wherever it's highest value. And when you say there's not enough spectrum for satellite, we need more. Well, maybe it's you need more terrestrial than it's really sort of it's nice to see in my mind to see negotiations between people who can freely move spectrum between whether it's used terrestrial or satellite. And I assume you can't use it in both at the same time, but people are making this trade-off of what the value is in the different things. And that's what I hope we move towards, that kind of issue in the future.
I think,
Yeah,
well, when
that
you look at, yeah,
I
okay.
would like to say
Okay.
that,
No,
Greg.
no,
So
Tom, go
good.
ahead.
But yeah, no, I mean, the whole thing is fantastic, and it's just it shows you how restrictive we've been, and how loosening the guardrails allows pretty amazing new stuff. So, and talking about where it's going to go, that's fool's gold. We'll find out, in 10 or 15 years. But certainly when satellite television came out in the 90s, it was only supposed to be a rural service. And very quickly it started showing up in suburbs and even in high density urban areas as needed, as demand provides. And, Jennifer talked about the falling costs for satellites. Some of the other technologies have come in. Well, they haven't had anywhere to go because the government has been trying to mix and match the exact rights, calling things satellite spectrum or fixed or mobile, having all these adjectives that should rightfully be the subject of entrepreneurs and innovators, and in fact, business enterprises that are making deals. So finally, we're getting to the point where the deals can be made, that we have liberalized so that these kinds of opportunities are available. And you start with texting because that's the efficient, low bandwidth service is obviously high valued in particular situations when lives are on the line. And then you work from there. And it seems to me that all kinds of services, including obviously broadband and including obviously mobile broadband, are on the horizon, and it could well go not just rural but urban, because there are other ways to get the bandwidth, like shooting the beam to the top of a building and having the building wired and have all kinds of boosters on the local area network that allows a lot of other things to happen. So, in terms of bandwidth. So, the fact that there are these partnerships that are the first stage of this is terrific. I mean, you do want coordination. You don't want monopoly, with a gateway provider. We've had that in the telecommunication systems around the world for a long time, but we don't have monopoly. We have multiple terrestrial and now satellite networks, and they're getting together and they're mixing and matching on their own. And efficiencies, untold efficiencies, are coming out, and everybody's got to pay attention. Certainly, the terrestrial carriers are they see an opportunity, but they're also, scared to death about what might happen if they sit on their hinds.
Did the
Yeah.
FCC create exclusive use spectrum either through the back door or by accident? I mean, for satellite. And are we going to end up with a different spectrum allocated in different ways, exclusive use versus shared? How are those likely to coexist?
But by the way, we have already mixed use.
Mm.
When you look at what XM Radio, now XM Sirius, has done, same spectrum is being used for satellite and for the terrestrial repeater network, right? The challenge with urban America is the nature of 4G and 5G, where every cell site that you can see is an interferer. And when you look down, you see a lot of cell sites, right? That's the challenge.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff, of course, moves forward not because the FCC sits down and says, "Let's make this more efficient."
Yeah.
The other way around. The entrepreneurs come into the FCC and say, "Why the hell can't we do this?" And they apply, and of course, they get a lot of opposition in the normal case, and things might stretch on for 15, 20 years. But at some point now, and with the air of liberalization wafting through the building due to some positive developments, you've got real opportunities to dramatically improve on the system and move this spectrum into a generic service definition and non-binding technological constraints, and delegate these efficiency decisions to the actual entrepreneurs in the marketplace.
Are we likely to see this affect competition on the terrestrial level that we think of today? I mean, first we thought of, broadband as just uh, competition in wires, and then wireless was a partial competitor, and then maybe now a full competitor. Then we have Starlink and the others that were joining it. And will this bring mobile um, into competition? Will it blur the lines further between whether people even care about the source of their connection at all?
Oh, absolutely. You know, people want to have a connectivity and they don't care how they get it. If they would get it with smoke signals, that would work too. What's also very interesting is we run the fastest, largest, most agile customer insight service. And so we run NPS on for broadband on over 600,000 people a year. And the people who are most satisfied are actually Starlink customers. Now, that is a function of A, the alternatives, and B, the ability to give it back when it does not work, and then you're unhappy with your current provider. So, and by the way, we see that the next follower is FWA, where you have the same scenario where you take it home, you try it. If it works, you're happy, and if it doesn't work, you bring it back, and we can't find you, right? And so Where satellite works, people are extremely happy with it.
But that's kind of got to be a function of the fact that where satellite works and people subscribe, they had nothing before, and then you also have the selection issue that you talked about. So but I
No,
agree.
they had cable and they had DSL. We see a clear. We
uh,
always ask people what they had before, so that we can tell for exactly that. And it's actually more than what many people think.
Yeah, Starlink now has dropped, they have a $120 a month service,
Yeah.
which by the way is price comparable with some of the cable operators. And then they've dropped it down to an $80 a month deal, which is certainly price competitive with cable and so-called DSL. AT&T in our neighborhood in South Carolina won't admit to having a DSL product because they don't want to have to bother with that old network, and they'll just give that up, although they're coming back now and trying to do wireless. And of course, fixed wireless now is just really taking the broadband market by storm. And again, Starlink's there now but they're not going to be the only one
No.
with competitive broadband stuff. So this is moving very rapidly, and it's actually exciting for the consumers for the first time in a while.
Scott, you mentioned coming to weigh in on the competition issue again, which is right now most people other than Tom use Wi-Fi for most of their stuff. Um, and so we already have kind of mixed mode of, on your mobile device, you're using cellular when you're walking, when you're driving or walking around, but when you're in a fixed location, you're often attached to Wi-Fi. And I think the same, that we're going to have mixed modes but again, I'm going to tell you that I'm not good at predicting the future. But there are going to be areas where it's much more economical to have terrestrial broadband mobile service and areas where it's better to have satellite broadband service, and customers may subscribe to the satellite service and even use it in dense urban areas because that they're primarily out in the rural areas or vice versa. And so it's going to be a mixture. And I think Tom's right in saying, we don't know what the future is going to be, but we're going to, we'll see it when we get there.
Yeah, by the way, I mean, you say that people, most of us on Wi-Fi. Well, really? You take away the wide area network that the Wi-Fi goes 30 feet and connects to and see how long your Wi-Fi does the trick. The Wi-Fi is a complement to these other networks, and the other networks are a complement to Wi-Fi. So yes, there are obviously a lot of possibilities for using that kind of mix and match system. But in terms of replacing the wide area networks, some people are trying to do it, and they're Google Fi and some products try to make all the phone calls over Wi-Fi if they can, and not to have well, the Wi-Fi again is still connecting with your cable or your telephone fiber. So, you got complications just in terms of what you're trying to do. One of the obviously the beauties of the market is that you'll get these kinds of combinations automatically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Scott,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead, Jennifer.
So Scott, I just wanted to go back to the original question on, where does that, I guess, where does D to D fit in? And I want to go back. We used to have this great video in the satellite industry called A Day in Life Without Satellite. And you would be surprised how much um, you've relied on satellite throughout the years that you didn't realize it. You go pull up to a gas station, you swipe your credit card, that's satellite. So I do think that I want to go back to the beginning. I think Roger said this is no one really cares what technology they're on. They care that they can connect when they need to. And I think that's really what d to d is bringing to this equation. For the first time, I can be in the desert, nowhere near anything. I don't need a special device. I just have my cell phone. I can choose whether maybe I choose a day pass. Maybe I'm a subscriber. I can get access to communications. And I really do think that's a game changer and people will use it where it makes sense.
Yeah. No, it is an absolute game changer and it saves lives without a doubt. And that's the true redeeming feature. I think every technology has a sweet spot, and it will be used in the predominantly in the sweet spot, but also in the adjacent areas, right? Fiber, very good, terrific technology, urban areas, right? The further you go out, it will probably be FWA because in urban areas, there's not enough capacity right now and spectrum for FWA. And the further rural you go, the stronger the case becomes for satellite. And that can be D2D or to a fixed solution. It doesn't matter, right? And because the satellite is also fixed in its capacity, right? And we need to add, if we want to add capacity, we have to send it up by a rocket, right? We can't send a crew very easily out and build a cell site, and even that takes years, right? And so
Right. The truck rolls are pretty expensive in
the
space.
truck rolls are very expensive, and fixing one of these things is even more expensive because usually you need to let it come down. And the launch capacity is limited. And I want to applaud AST to find the launch capacity for all the satellites when basically their prime competitor is controlling most of the launch capacity, right? And when I say, by the way, you mentioned I said like, Starlink won already. Yes and no. The reason why Starlink hasn't won and why there's room for others is that a lot of people don't want to live in Elon Musk's world, right? And right, that's why that's a very big factor here. Other than that, he's vertically integrated and can control everything, and he could crowd everybody out with that. But we should be very grateful that we have companies like AST, that we have companies like Amazon or Jeff Bezos with his new enterprise who are bringing competition to this. That early lead that without a doubt Elon Musk and Starlink has is not foreclosing the market.
Let's talk about a little bit of a detour, but let's talk about Elon Musk's world for a second. With the launch industry, SpaceX dominates it right now, but there are others and others making progress, like Rocket Lab, which is supposed to have a launch vehicle that can compete directly with Falcon, although it blew up a couple weeks ago on a test. Are you seeing evidence that they are facing more competition, or or is that still kind of too far away to be relevant in today's market?
Well, is there more competition coming? Yes. But is it here? And as Maynard, as Keynes said, like in the long run, we're all dead, right? We live here and now. And here and now, there's not enough launch capacity, and Starlink has most of it. Like not what was it last year? 94% of the launch capacity came from
Yeah,
Starlink,
huge
right?
number.
It's huge. And so we should also be very grateful that we have you know Bezos and others with additional launch capacity, and hopefully they will expand it because I don't see us not going to space.
Now, with big technological revolutions, there are always groups that would prefer not to see it. And there's a huge incumbent space industry already. And what we're seeing now with this huge improvements in broadband coverage from space, direct to device, or even fixed. How much of this happened despite opposition? So, with the fact that they can now use terrestrial providers' exclusive use spectrum, uh, did that happen almost kind of without the incumbents uh, realizing what the implications would be? And let's set aside the international question because I know that's a big issue. But how, what's what has their role been in this?
So maybe I can try and talk to that, Scott. I'm not sure I have the perfect answer, but first off, I think one of the big concerns when this, if you look back at the record, when the FCC started the supplementary coverage, was an interference concern. And um, and the question was, because a lot of satellite, below 3 gigs in particular is interleaved with terrestrial. And so I think the FCC did a good job at addressing that by making it clear that these operators have to operate, consistent with the protections that the terrestrial operators have. That was probably, and you have to remember that the spectrum that we're talking about where the terrestrial bands there isn't that much satellite spectrum, right? There's the 3 big blocks of L-band spectrum, right, where Iridium Globalstar and Inmarsat Legato is. There's the 2 gigahertz, which was EchoStars, and certainly, so there wasn't a huge, at that point, there wasn't a huge focus on MSS, right? So that's part of it. I'm not so sure that there were I can't think of that many FSS providers that actually participated in those, actively in those proceedings.
Hmm.
So in a way, yes, but I think it was who was already focused on NTN and non-terrestrial networks, which is what we refer to it a lot in the satellite and the standards world. So I don't know that people were sleeping. I just don't know if there was a way to really stop it.
Well, yeah, and perhaps we're being a little too generous to the regulatory system. It has blocked a lot for a long time, and there have been these skirmishes. And the thing right now that's just shaking the foundations of the system is SpaceX saying, "Well, okay, we're just going to take $20 billion and buy our way out of this problem." And that is huge. That is a tectonic plate shift. Now you say, well, Elon's got the money, and the company is valued at. I heard today on CNBC they're talking about a private company going for its IPO at a valuation of $1.25 trillion.
Well, that's clearly just driven by the boring company aspect of it, right?
The foreign aspect?
No, never mind. Go ahead.
Yeah, his robots. I don't know, but it does give perhaps Musk some degrees of freedom the rest of us don't have. But $20 billion is a way to buy your company out of the problems of negotiating endlessly. And so obviously the opportunities that are coming on the radar screen are being seen by business enterprises and partnerships as tremendous path forward, and they are. And that's why it is important to see these partnerships develop and be allowed by regulators.
So, Tom,
And
how does this fit into the framework of your book,
what's
where
that?
incumbents, always use technical arguments to try to block progress?
Well, right. Well, that's what I'm sort of calling out for the last
Mhm.
many years. There've been there, there's been a good industry of rent seeking, and goes back and forth. And I don't say it with a snarl. Those are the incentives for the players in the market not to be roadkill because you didn't pay attention and somebody else got the rights that are necessary to your business. So anyway, the game has changed because there are opportunities given the tremendous innovations in technology, the falling costs for the small satellites, the fact you can have thousands of satellite constellations up in the air, launch costs plummeting, and so forth. So, and the services on Earth, we all have broadband service now. We all want broadband service. When I say we all, nobody even stops for a minute to think it's not global. Yeah, it's really a tremendous opportunity going forward, and the skies are sitting there waiting to have the cell sites that are the most efficient. So I think that fortunately we're rolling right through to the efficiencies now in some respects, and the rent seeking they're referring to, Scott, is a problem. We should try to grease the skids and smooth the path for the gains from trade to the extent possible. And some of us on this call here are certainly, I think, part of the solution in some of those things. So, and some people at the FCC and so forth, policymakers aren't completely hostile to this. So, it's an exciting time to push even harder for that liberalization.
Let's go back a second to some of the more technical parts of this. Maybe Roger, you can answer this, or Jennifer. Um, how do we consider what the number of satellites in a constellation means? So Starlink has many more than AST for now. China just said that it wants to put a constellation of 200,000 satellites, which is, an order of magnitude more than Starlink. Who knows what that statement means? But, to say something stupid, which is I'm really used to, space is big, right? Are any of these big numbers, or are they small? And how do we compare? How do we know how to compare different types of infrastructure up there?
Well, I would say we are comparing here apples and oranges.
Okay, good.
AST's satellites are by far more powerful than Starlink's satellites, right? But they're making it up in numbers, right? And so it becomes a much more redundant system. But yeah, we can't compare. We have to look at what can each of the satellites do. With more satellites, you have more connections in the sky, right? Where you can hand over and you see more satellites. That's the primary strength. If you own the rockets that are bringing up the satellites, you have less of a problem in that regard. And so, everything that goes up also comes down. And that's one of the critical functions here. So we will suffer with a lot of space debris because these satellites are only up there in about 300 miles, 500 kilometers, roughly. Their time in space is somewhere around 8, maybe 10 years. The larger you make them, the larger. By the way, the reason why we can do now direct to device is we moved the antenna because people hated the little antenna on the phone. We now moved that antenna into space, right? And these satellites have, even the small ones have really big antennas. The AST ones have antennas the size of football fields, right? These are major objects in space. And I don't think it's unreasonable to think that some of them will not, that some of them will collide almost without, most likely, when you have 8,000 satellites in space, something will go wrong, right? We all know that. And so dealing with the space debris is certainly going to be an issue. We haven't, I don't think, fully thought through, right, of what that means, because these are metallic objects and they will burn up, but they don't disappear, right?
Jennifer, how long do AST satellites are likely to stay in space relative to a Starlink satellite? I assume somewhat longer because they're more expensive and much be higher up. And
I don't have the numbers with me, Scott, so I don't want to give them. But yeah, our satellites are longer lived. We're also working very closely with our partners at the National Science Foundation, the International Astronomical Union, NASA, the FCC, and other regulators, at the ITU and other bodies to ensure, and with other operators through our trade associations to ensure we are safe. Needless to say, it is in our interest to operate in a safe space environment. We have to get these satellites up, we have to operate them. I stay awake not so much because of the operators, that are licensed by the FCC, but by the Chinese and other operators who may not be complying with the same sort of rules and same sort of ethos that we have, with the more, I don't want to say Western, but
Mhm.
more traditional satellite operators, because we do care. I mean, there is a very big self-interest here as we want safe and sustainable space for the long term too. So, it's not like an operator goes up and throws up a satellite without foresight. We have a whole, a team I'm very lucky to work with, who are incredibly focused on this. And we're incredibly focused on it. And one of the things we did design our satellites was so that they would fully demise when they go through Earth's orbit, so we don't have any orbital debris hitting the Earth. So I'm sure other operators have done whatever they've done. I'm just saying. So yes, I think it is a real issue. I agree with Roger. More can always be done here and should be done. Um, but the space has taken off, I think, faster than folks have been able to grapple with it in some ways.
Which countries do you worry about the most? I mean, you mentioned China, but I assume China also has an incentive to want things to work up there, maybe for different reasons than we do. But they don't. But they want to be able to operate. Maybe does Russia have less of an incentive and more of a reason to want to
I
crash
I,
things?
I don't want to call out countries. I think that there's some countries have certain, not that they don't want to be safe, but there may be competitive reasons for certain things they do. I always go back to the fact that there's a great story, which I'm sure everyone here has heard about Iridium. And there was a Russian tethered satellite. It was like tethered to two satellites, and it got hooked on the end of the
Um,
Iridium antenna. It was years ago.
mhm.
I mean, that's an example of unintended consequences, right? And something that's not being watched. So are they participating? Are they sharing data? Are they picking up their phones? I mean, a lot of this is still done just between operators. At the end of the day, coordination is literally coordination among operators. Um, I think the Office of Space Commerce track system is very important to keep going. That was a great effort by the Commerce Department to put in place tracking. So all of these things have to come together, but you have to be incented to participate, and not everyone's incentives are the same. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. So one more question about this, and then let's come back to spectrum, and then I want to talk a little bit about the international issues. But you mentioned space debris, and that AST at least is working with materials that will burn up, and so there was a question about the state of progress of the development of more sustainable satellites, and then so that was an example of a company developing satellites made of wood. I don't know how true that was, but I was just at a car museum in Hickory Corners, Michigan, and they had a car made entirely of wood, which was amazing. Um, but I mean, what sorts of materials do you work with?
So this is an area outside. I'm a lawyer,
Yeah,
not a
yeah, sure.
technologist.
Oh,
So
I'm an economist. I don't know anything about materials.
so I'm the wrong person, but it's not wood. And I did see the satellite made out of wood, and I think it's super cool. But I think we're still, I can see as a lawyer, I can see lots of issues with that, but I don't know if they're real. So, but there's always new materials. And you're working with, I mean, no matter what, remember, weight adds, everything you add adds to the weight of the satellite, gets it harder to launch. So, I don't know how heavy wood is, right? So is that, there's questions like that. So that's why you have rocket scientists.
Right. And we're not rocket scientists. Um, What's that made from magnolia wood, as I recall, this person says. Okay. Greg, you started off by saying, you don't see space spectrum or terrestrial spectrum, just spectrum. Uh, so do you worry that I mean, that lots of good things are happening now, but we're kind of heading down a road where we're um, categorizing spectrum in ways that we shouldn't be?
I think so. I'm gonna take the chance to answer another question that I wanted to ask you
Excellent.
first.
Uh,
But first, I think we are moving more towards flexible. This using terrestrial spectrum by satellites and other things seems like it is breaking down the barriers in the right way. And I hope it continues to do that. And we try to make things more flexible, not say this is for satellites and this is for terrestrial, but this can be used for communications. Um, one thing that Roger brought up was talking about the near monopoly of launches by SpaceX,
Mhm.
and you have to think about whether that's that clearly we want competition, but SpaceX has been orders of magnitude more efficient at launching than we had before. And if we didn't have, it would be better to have the SpaceX monopoly than to not have this not launch technology, I think. I mean, that's from an outsider. I just wanted to make sure I'm characterizing that right, Roger.
Yeah,
That
no,
it is,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. We're
So we need to,
infinitely better off
yeah,
with
yeah,
that launch capability, right?
yeah. So
We couldn't
that's,
we couldn't
yeah,
supply the ISS,
yeah,
for example, without it, right?
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about the international issues. So this is often where some of this gets to be the most complicated because at the way things are set up, you have to work within the ITU, which has a history of never wanting to see competition in anything. If I may overgeneralize just a little bit, uh, and there are some issues. We've got satellites don't stay over one country, these low Earth orbit ones anyway, and so you have to be able to turn off your transmission as you go over countries where you're not authorized to transmit. Um, how is well, somebody said something like 80% of the agenda for the WRC coming up is about satellite now. Uh, how
Space,
are they thinking about
space,
this?
space,
Space.
not
Sorry,
satellites. Sorry.
you're right. You're right. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Yes, space is, as I said, big. Satellite's only part of it. But how are people at other countries and in other relevant organizations thinking about this? And are we just blasting past them, so to speak, to find ways to make these services happen here, regardless of what international organizations say? And Jennifer, you have so much experience in these
Yes, I,
areas.
I have no problem starting this
Hmm.
discussion, but I'd love to hear solutions from my smarter friends. So let me start by saying satellites have been in space for most of my lifetime, if not my entire lifetime, communicating. And satellites have been passing overhead of countries for years, and there have been no complaints. And the ITU does have a very strict rules, and I agree there's no enforcement done by political pressure, but does have requirements that you do not provide unauthorized services into a country. So your term transmit into a country, and I'm not saying satellites don't actually turn off, but they're not transmitting communications down to the country. So that is if you go through the ITU radio regulations, you will see that you have the right, it's a US constellation flying over Russia, doesn't have authorization to provide service in Russia. We should not be operating in Russia. End of story. That's clear under the rules. That's understood. Unfortunately, not everything's perfect. Sometimes people do bend the rules and provide service. And the issue, and this was very controversial at the end of WRC 2023, where Iran alleged it had received unauthorized services from Starlink and produced, evidence to that. And that's a debate that's still going on in the Radio Regulations Board. It's our judiciary of the ITU. And Iran very much wants to see some restrictions on that, as do some other countries. The question, there's a lot of details and technical, and I could argue if the agenda item's written right. But essentially, I
Although if
think
it comes from Iran, it's pretty clear they just want to keep people from communicating, right? There's no real reason for it other than that. It's an oppressive
um,
regime. I am not that you have to say anything.
thank you.
Okay.
I'll let you be rhetoric there.
Yes.
But there's, other countries, to be fair, if you look into the record, there's other countries who have said that they've received unauthorized transmissions, and people do sometimes, beams fall over. We have very small beams. Our beams are 25 miles. That's the smallest beams I know of. So there could be some spillover, right? Things happen. And so the question at the ITU right now at WRC, and it's an important question because Iran and the BRICS countries are very focused on this is should there be restrictions on service, on how satellites operate over other countries. I personally believe strongly that the existing regime has worked and continues to work, and should be as it is. That this has been going on since time immemorial in my lifetime at least. And there's no other action, and no one has proposed any action that makes sense. You're not going to have a satellite all of a sudden turn off while it's over another country. That doesn't make sense. That's not called for by the agenda item. So I'm not sure
Although,
we're going to.
sorry to interrupt, but to be clear, even though they don't turn off, you're not transmitting on on a licensed frequency in a country where
Correct. You're not
the
transmitting into the country,
okay,
but you're
yeah,
still,
right,
but you
okay,
still have your satellite
yeah.
on. It's so, but yes, that's the rules today.
Mhm.
So really the question is, what is it, is this anything more than political? And is this an anti-competitive, in a lot of ways, this can be viewed as an anti-competitive agenda item. It's asking operators to do things that they're already doing. And maybe there's a couple of examples where things aren't perfect, but nothing is. So just a high level view of that. So, but this is a very important agenda item. Iran has made it clear this is a very important agenda item. There's a meeting going on while we speak at the ITU. Then I'm sure this issue is coming up. It will come up at the upcoming study group meetings in April and May. And so this continues to be something that drives a lot of what the ITU does. And even Russia had held an informal UN Security Council meeting on space, and this was one of the issues they raised there. So, it's going to be a big fight for the US and others.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds if Iran and Russia are the ones leading the fight, then this is something that we absolutely should have. Anything that they together don't want is probably something the rest of the world should have. Anyway,
Well, could I, yeah, ask
Morning
Jennifer
and
on this
welcome to
too,
the
because
Recon Analytics.
oh, I
go ahead,
just
Tom.
kept thinking about uh, the European cartel in the 1980s. They were very protectionist on state broadcasting all across Europe. Germany didn't have a private network until 1986. And so an American entrepreneur, Tom Whitehead, shopped around a little bit, found one of the smaller countries, Luxembourg, and partnered with the state, the sovereign, because there was an agreement under the common market that the member states themselves would not block transmissions coming, duly authorized in another European country. At any rate, Whitehead and SES Astra launched in the early 80s, I believe it was, and they were sued by 8 European countries the day they launched. But the agreement held, and SES Astra became a very big satellite TV distributor around the globe, still is. Anyway, why not allow entrepreneurs to press their luck on this kind of a thing? You may have a good answer, but I'm curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't think it's not saying that entrepreneurs can't do it. What the countries want is they want absolute sovereignty over their country. So they basically want. No, we're not talking about landing traffic. Everyone has to go get authorizations. Tom did what Renee Anselmo did, right? He broke market access, right? He went in and figured out how to get in. Here it's the opposite. Here these countries are saying we don't want you in, and we don't want your satellite even to be beeping as it goes overhead. So this goes to the next step, and I think entrepreneurs would like to get in. That's a different issue. One of my big jobs, Tom, is to get market access in countries, right? But this goes the next step, I think, which is these countries are trying to say you actually have to turn your satellite off, or you have to let us know exactly what you're doing and report it. There's a number of proposals. So this really, kind of goes the next step further.
So where are ITU and the WARC on this?
Well, it'll be a WRC 27 agenda item. I expect it to come up at the 2026 Plenipotentiary Conference. There certainly will be a big space component. So we're working on, the US has been very strong with its allies against this agenda item and trying to find a way forward. But I still believe a lot of it is to block, new services, including things like direct to device, which do create issues in regimes like Iran.
Right.
There's a question that's basically along these lines. regarding WRC 27, what should we be doing? What should the US be doing to be prepared? And by the way, we're just about to release a podcast that we interviewed Steve Lang on WRC 27. Hopefully, release it this week. So what should the U.S. be doing? Are we in a good spot? I mean, we don't even have a head of delegation yet.
We never have a head of delegation because you
Okay.
can't appoint a U.S. ambassador until 6 months before the conference because it's a 6 month appointment. Something that a lot of people in industry, myself, would like to change, but it's a non-Senate confirmed seat.
Hmm.
So no, we don't have a head of
Interesting.
delegation. But I will say the FCC, State Department, NTIA, the U.S. delegation, industry players were working very hard on this. This is a very, very big focus for the U.S. I mean, we only have, I think, 2 minutes left. I could probably go on for 60 minutes on this, Scott. So we'll leave it that we're working it, and there's ongoing studies and work behind the scenes to move forward on this, including in our region.
Right, we do only have a couple minutes left. So, what should we be looking for to know whether this is developing in a sort of more pro-competitive way, not WRC, but the industry in general? Should we be watching to see whether we see trades in secondary spectrum markets, more companies offering direct to device? Uh, how should we be monitoring this kind of new development in the industry?
Well, I'll jump in, and because I don't know anything about space, so I'll start with competition, which is, seeing the ability for the for all firms, both those who operate in space and those who operate terrestrially, to compete, to offer new products, to have the ability to get the spectrum to try and do what they want to do, and to partner, and that you're going to see different business strategies. Some are, just like we had when the U.S. went to digital, we had CDMA and TDMA and different types of technologies. I think we're going to have different partnerships and different machinations between satellite and terrestrial and Wi-Fi and all these things. And I think that's the way we want to have it work.
Okay. That is a good place to leave it right at 12 o'clock. Thank you all so much for joining. This was a really interesting conversation. Each time I talk to somebody about space, I learn a little bit more and realize how much I don't know. Um, so thank you all very much. And thank you to everyone who joined us.